a coalition to reform our legislature, a bipartisan group of concerned citizens working to make our state legislature more effective, transparent, and accountable, all of which it needs to be. I'm Jake Hoffman. I have the honor of serving as moderator for today. And we're here today because the legislature has not only failed to be effective, accountable, and transparent, it has failed us. We sought to file 2 bills to address some of the serious problems with how the State House operates. One proposed to establish a nonpartisan research and fiscal analysis capability, and the second sought to address major problems with the so-called leadership stipends. And in that effort, we discovered yet another sorry reality about the State House. Under the legislature's arcane rules and procedures, our bills were sent on 2 slightly different paths to oblivion. So we set out to file those under our right of free petition articulated in Article 19 of the Constitution, the Declaration of Rights. The folks across the street have modified our rights to be the right to file a bill and have it filed in the bottom drawer of a desk or file cabinet in the clerk's office. Those bills were never sent to committee, would never be heard across the street, would never have the opportunity for public discourse, would never trigger the kind of public conversation that we all, at least we all, feel we need to be having. So that's why we're here. We're here to have the hearing that the folks across the street didn't think we deserved or didn't need to have. I'll spare you some details. I'm happy to answer questions later on about sort of the process and how effective they were across the street in denying us our access to legislation. But I'll spare you the details of that right now to get right to the heart of the matter, because they circled the wagons and we want to make sure we have our day in court. So we're going to start with presentations on the 2 bills that we have filed, just to help set the stage. And then a number of people have signed up to testify. Any of you who have not signed up are still invited to do so. We're eager to have a conversation about this, eager to respond to press questions as they may arise. And with that, I would happily introduce Jonathan Hecht, a former colleague in the State House across the street. We sat in adjacent seats, walked a somewhat different trajectory through the place. I was always very jealous of John's incredible ability to never veer from telling the truth and never bowing to the power and the status quo in a way that I would have wanted to also not veer from. I would have wanted to veer from. And then he'll be followed by Jean Kempthorne, who is a prosecutor by training and experience, has worked on the State Ethics Commission, and John took the lead on the bill dealing with stipends, and Jean the lead on the bill dealing with the lack of research and analysis capability that we are so seriously concerned about. So, John, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. So as Jay said, I'm here to talk about the Legislative Stipend Reform Bill, which is HD 4303 and SD 1301, which would change the way legislators are paid in Massachusetts with the goal of strengthening democracy in the legislature and improving lawmaking. Many people in Massachusetts are dissatisfied with how our state legislature operates. Last November, the ballot question to subject the legislature to an outside audit by the state auditor passed with a 72% yes vote. That overwhelming margin reflects the public's high level of frustration with the lack of transparency and accountability in the legislature. Unlike at the local level, where select boards and city councils follow the open meeting law, the public can't see or understand what's going on in the state legislature. Legislative committees don't discuss bills in public or take public votes. When bills come to the floor, there's virtually no debate, especially in the House. and very few recorded votes by which to hold legislators accountable. People in Massachusetts are also frustrated by the legislature's lack of responsiveness to those it represents. Regular citizens, local officials, and advocacy groups wait for hours to testify before legislative committees, and then wait months more to see what action the committee will take. Often there is no action, with no explanation why. These problems, lack of transparency, accountability, and responsiveness, are largely due to the fact that lawmaking in Massachusetts is tightly controlled by a small number of legislative leaders. Most legislation is crafted by this small group behind closed doors in huge omnibus bills that are pushed through with little opportunity for scrutiny or debate. Most legislators are cut out of the process, disempowering them and the people they represent. Meanwhile, hundreds of bills that would bring real benefits to Massachusetts languish year after year with no action, because the small number of people in control don't have the time, interest, or incentive to bring them to a vote. The stipend reform bill filed by the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature takes aim at a key source of this legislative dysfunction by changing the way legislators get paid. The bill would reduce top-down control, incentivize more transparency in lawmaking, and empower every one of our legislators. Legislators in Massachusetts get paid in two ways. All 200 senators and representatives receive the same base salary, currently $82,000 a year. But legislators who are appointed to various positions within the legislature can receive stipends that add another $8,000 to $112,000 to their yearly pay. These appointments to leadership positions and as committee chairs and vice chairs are made at the sole discretion of the chamber leaders. The vast majority are controlled by the Senate President or the Speaker of the House. A small number by the minority party leaders in each chamber. The number of these stipends has more than doubled in the last 30 years. In 1995, there were 38 stipends in the Senate and 40 in the House. Today, there are 74 in the Senate and 109 in the House. As a result, the four chamber leaders now control stipends worth over $5 million a year. In no other legislature in the country do legislative leaders have so much public money to give out in extra pay to favored legislators. And in no other legislature in the country do legislators receive such a large share of their pay directly from their chamber leader. It's not hard to see how this stipend system contributes to the problems in our legislature. Stipends create a conflict of interest for legislators between their duty to represent their constituents and their relationship to legislative leaders with control over their pay. Legislators in Massachusetts are financially dependent on leadership, and dependency breeds deference. Legislators wait to be told what to do. Acting openly and independently risks losing significant income. Committee chairs are rewarded for keeping work on bills behind closed doors, where leadership can shape and control them. Unlike in the 1980s and 1990s, committees no longer hold open meetings at which members discuss, amend, and vote on bills. In fact, apart from when they hold hearings to take public testimony, committees never meet at all. This means lobbyists with back-channel access to the chairs and leadership have far more influence on legislation than the committee members themselves, let alone members of the public. The use of stipends to reward deference has led to a proliferation of committees that do no real work. In 1995, the legislature had 34 committees. Now it has 53. Many of these are what the Boston Globe calls no heavy lifting committees that hear no bills, never meet, and produce nothing. Leadership positions have proliferated too. Democrats in the Senate and House had 3 floor leaders until the late 1990s. Now they have 7 and 9 leaders respectively, each receiving a stipend of $45,000 to $75,000 a year. The Coalition to Reform Our Legislature believes in paying legislators reasonable compensation. They have important work to do, and we do not want to make it only possible for the wealthy to serve in the legislature or to force our legislators to spend most of their time on second jobs. But we should not have a system of legislative compensation that breeds deference, pays extra for no work, rewards lawmaking behind closed doors, and disempowers most of our representatives. We should have a system of legislative compensation that pays for real performance, encourages all legislators to participate, and incentivizes lawmaking that is democratic, transparent, and accountable. These are the goals of our stipend reform bill. It would achieve them, first, by cutting the number and size of stipends controlled by leadership, eliminating stipends for no heavy lifting committees, and other positions that don't merit extra pay. This will reduce legislators' financial dependence on Senate and House leaders and free them to represent their constituents actively and independently. Second, to incentivize transparency and curtail lawmaking behind closed doors, the bill would condition the payment of stipends on committees holding public debates and public votes on every bill. Furthermore, to promote efficiency, the bill sets out timeframes within which committee debates and votes would have to occur. Third, the bill would shift a portion of the funds saved by eliminating unjustified stipends to provide additional compensation to rank and file members of joint committees in recognition that their active participation, and not just that of leaders and chairs, is the key to making lawmaking democratic and responsive. The stipend reform bill proposes a rational, reasonable legislative pay system that promotes the representation, transparency, and accountability that underlie a strong democracy. That's why it's supported by our bipartisan coalition and the other people here to speak today. The fact that this bill cannot even get a hearing in the State House speaks volumes about the need for legislative reform in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to speak about the other bill, the Research and Fiscal Analysis Office bill, which I envisioned as a we're here to help you bill. But that somehow, the gift nature of this bill was lost in the legislature. So I just want to say something I think everybody in this room agrees with. It's past time to make changes in the way our State House functions. It's past time. We, the people, require that it become more efficient, more effective, more competent, more transparent, and more responsive to our will and our needs. This research bill is not, the silver bullet that's going to achieve all of that. What it is a concrete idea to achieve this goal, to move the ball forward. The idea is to reestablish, we once had one, an in-house, professional, nonpartisan legislative research office, and to create, for the first time, a fiscal analysis office accessible not just to the leadership, not just to the staff of Ways and Means, but to all members of the legislature. Our bill, which is sitting in rules, no hearing likely in this lifetime, certainly not in this session, you can find it online, H3892 and SD2614. That bill is intended to create two offices in the legislature that would accomplish those objectives. Fact, Massachusetts is the only state in the nation, in the whole United States, without an in-house body charged with providing legislators with services to enable them to meaningfully engage in the legislative process, such as policy analysis, factual and statistical research, fiscal analysis, financial and economic projections, and bill drafting. It wasn't always so. In-house legislative services were eliminated decades ago in response to a public hue and cry about patronage and waste. Instead of eliminating patronage and waste, in 1992, the legislature defunded its research bureau, and then in 2011, repealed its enabling legislation. Did we suddenly not need legislative research? Hardly. In 1954, when the original Legislative Research Bureau was created, the legislature understood its importance. I quote in part, it's a long factual finding that the legislature made. It is hereby declared that painstaking, exhaustive, and accurate fact-finding is a necessity in the proper discharge of legislative duties in a legislative body encompassing the scope of the General Court of Massachusetts, and that a legislative research staff is currently recognized as an invaluable and indispensable tool in the efficient performance of the legislative process. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the legislature in 1954. The world, I submit, has not become less complex, less technical, or less specialized in the 71 years since the legislature declared research indispensable. Without question, the need now for independent research, competent drafting, fiscal analysis, evaluation of policy, technical revisions to badly or mistakenly drafted bills, and periodic review and recodification of the general laws is even more essential. While one would think that the fundamental job of legislators is to write and pass legislation, rank and file legislators do not have sufficient staff who can be relied upon to expertly draft bills. It's not the fault of the staff, much less do extensive research delving into complicated issues of public policy or fiscal impact. Legislative committees are not much better equipped. Disempowered legislators and overburdened staff focus instead on what? Local earmarks and constituent services, leaving the formulation of major bills to leadership and lobbyists. No shock, then, that little of statewide significance gets done. And then when it gets done behind closed doors and at the last minute, or after the last minute. The lack of in-house policy and economic experts tasked to analyze the potential and on-the-ground impacts of existing and pending legislation is one reason why estimates of the impact of the Fair Share Amendment on both tax revenue and small businesses were largely unreliable. The lack of a fiscal analysis office is the reason the Speaker of the House was caught off guard in 2022 when unforeseen tax revenues triggered taxpayer refunds of nearly $3 billion. In defense, these again, not my words, the Speaker asked in part, "You expect our Ways and Means staff to keep abreast of every change or potential change?" Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, we do. The time has come to again provide legislators with expert services to ensure that they are equipped to do the critical work they were elected to do. They and we need a fair and unbiased understanding of the impacts of pending legislation before it becomes law in our Commonwealth. Given that this bill would empower legislators to do a better job for their constituents and for the Commonwealth as a whole, you would think they would be grateful that concerned citizens stepped up to draft it. You'd think they would have rushed to endorse the bill or make suggestions to improve it. You'd think they would have engaged with us. Engaged. Why, they don't need it. They did neither. One has to wonder why. Are they too comfortable doing next to nothing and reaping the rewards of loyal inaction? Have they come to see their jobs as scrambling for the crumbs the leadership throws their way in exchange for lucrative committee assignments and blind votes because they're voting blind? Are our legislators putting their self-interest ahead of the public interest? How telling that the legislators who grudgingly filed the research and fiscal analysis bill by constituent request in the House and Senate haven't offered any explanation for their refusal to endorse this bill. And then they sideline the bill to a committee that doesn't deal with bills. This isn't the way to do the people's business. We deserve better, and we're here today to demand better. Thank you.
So I'm sure you can see that why I feel very privileged to be able to work with people like this. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, John. The first, yeah?
Can we ask questions?
Let's hold off for just a few minutes, but then we would love to have some questions. We'll bring Jean and John back. Actually, let's go with the question while they're here. A quick question. You have privilege.
Quick question number one. Didn't these voters,
Go ahead. I'll bring it.
didn't the voters 20 or 30 years ago
Just keep going. Don't worry.
try to set a standard for legislative pay, and is the stipend a slip sliding around what the voters wanted 20 or 30 years ago? That's question one. Question two is, hasn't the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, said that some of the legislation that comes before them they have to review is sloppy and it should be reworked?
This is very easy yes and yes, correct?
Yes, many times.
And yes, in 1998, the voters approved a constitutional amendment setting the base pay and a formula for adjusting it over time. And the stipends have become a backdoor way of compensating in return for loyalty and deference.
So the first two people coming to the front are Jennifer Nassour and Scotia Hill, active members of our team CROL.
I'm just going to say for everyone here, isn't this really impressive? Republicans and Democrats getting together in Massachusetts to change something. This is where real change is, not necessarily in that building, but all of you and all of us working together and working for a common cause of good democracy. Dear members of the committee and the public here, thank you for the opportunity to submit my testimony in strong support of this critical legislative reform measures before you. For those of you that don't know, my name is Jennifer Nassour. I'm an attorney, the co-founder of the Pocketbook Project, the host of Political Contessa, a former chair of the Mass Republican Party, and the current finance chair of the Mass Republican Party. I've spent years advocating for accountability and transparency within our state government. Unfortunately, year after year, our state legislature continues to operate under a system that lacks transparency and fairness that voters rightly deserve. While Massachusetts itself presents as a national leader in good governance, not sure how, the day-to-day reality on Beacon Hill tells a very different story. Power is concentrated in the hand of a few individuals. Important legislation is drafted behind closed doors. Committee hearings are either inconsistent or more likely non-existent. Lawmakers are often discouraged from speaking out or even asking basic questions. And the public, the very people our legislators are elected to serve, is almost entirely shut out of the process. This isn't just a procedural issue, it is a foundational problem for our democracy. That is why I'm supporting these two straightforward common sense reforms. The first measure I would like for all of us to support, and it would be great for them to hear this, is the creation of an independent, nonpartisan, legislative and fiscal analysis bureau. It doesn't seem like this is something we should fight about or not have. The Research Bureau would provide legislators with unbiased, fact-based analysis. It would allow all lawmakers, including the minority on our side, regardless of your party or your position, because we all know that it is all concentrated with the few up there, and the ones that come in that are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and naive have no chance of ever being able to get their own legislative research done. We want them to better understand the legislation that they're voting on without relying on that political leadership or the lobbyist influence. This reform promotes informed decision-making and strengthens the legislative process. I would also like the committee to consider eliminating the current committee stipend system, which allows lawmakers to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra taxpayer-funded income for chairing committees that may never even meet. It is an outdated, opaque practice that undermines public trust. I believe committee leadership should be based on merit and performance, not seniority or political loyalty. These proposals presented before you are absolutely not partisan. They are not radical. They are simply intended to shed light on a process that has been hidden in the shadows for far too long. Voters expect transparency, honesty, and efficiency from their government. These reforms are a step toward restoring that trust and ensuring that every legislator can do their job that they were elected by all of us to do, to serve the people, not the political machinery. I respectfully urge you to advance these measures and take a clear stand for more accountable democratic legislature. And I can't wait to send this to them. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Scotia Hill and I'm here in my role as Executive Director of Act on Mass to testify in favor of these two critical legislative reform bills. Act on Mass is a nonprofit organization focused on fighting corruption and inaction in the Massachusetts State Legislature. We seek to recenter constituents in the democratic process and bring about a state legislature that's accountable to we, the people, not special interests. A key part of that process, the reform process, lies in a return to traditional democratic principles, that is, a grassroots representative democracy, in which, ideally, every 2 years, citizens around the Commonwealth get the chance to elect a representative from a slate of their peers, largely based on the policies that that person says that they will advocate for in office. That person is then imbued with the collective power of their constituents to act on their behalf on legislation that concerns them. Forgive me for the civics lesson, but few legislators run by making promises about the size of their earmarks that they will get for their district or the wonderful constituent services that they will deliver. However, new representatives show up to work at our legislature and find out that, in the opinion of leadership, their job is exactly that. Most rank and file representatives are completely disempowered to enact or even take public stances on legislation that matters to their constituents. Members of House and Senate leadership maintain near total control over the movement of legislation. Enormous omnibus bills crafted by leadership often come out of closed-door committees with just hours of notice before a vote is held, leaving rank-and-file members with little time to build background on the bills that they're voting on. Although legislators may file amendments, those that do not have the support of leadership are often withdrawn under pressure without a vote. The result is a system where, and this is true, in the most recent House session, 85% of Democratic representatives voted with the Speaker 100% of the time. The numbers are only slightly less shocking in the Senate. Although further reform would certainly be needed, the two bills under consideration today offer two solutions to this problem, in which our own elected representatives are unable to actively represent our interests due to the pressures of an autocratic system. The first bill, to restore independent legislative research, would offer to rank-and-file representatives a source of independent information on legislation. Currently, research on bills is left to committee staff, who typically report to the House co-chair, a member of leadership hand-selected by the Speaker. Creating an independent source of information on bills would help rank-and-file members be more informed on the legislation that they're considering, and ideally, help them build support for legislation that their constituent may support, but leadership and their corporate donors may not. The second bill, to reform the stipend system, would dismantle perhaps the most impactful tool leadership has for maintaining control over the membership. In a system where a single vote off from leadership can risk a significant portion of your salary, our lawmakers have to weigh their own livelihoods and the stability of their families against the will of their constituents. That is no way to structure a democracy. This bill would reestablish a system where legislators work for their constituents, not for leadership. It is shameful that both of these bills will deny their rightful hearing through the democratic process, but that will not dissuade the movement for reform, and I urge you to take action with us in favor of these two bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Scotia. Except I'm experiencing PTSD, remembering what it was like over there for 20 years. Danielle Allen, Mike Whitmer, and Amy Carnival, who would come up.
First, let me just say thank you so much to Jay and John and Jean and all of your colleagues for your leadership on this incredibly important issue. I'm Danielle Allen. I'm very glad to be here. I'm here today. I don't have many hats. The hat I'm wearing right now, you can't see, is my Coalition for Healthy Democracy hat. I'm here representing a ballot initiative committed to healthy democracy in Massachusetts. That means being committed to competitiveness, accountability, and transparency. And the ballot initiative is working on a measure to replace party primaries with a single all-party primary for all state and federal offices except for president. Everybody runs on the same ballot, then two people go forward to the general election. Why are we doing this? We're doing this for the same reason that these two bills are incredibly important. Because we have a legislature in Massachusetts that is no longer responsive to the people. Individual legislators don't have independence from the speaker for all the reasons that we've articulated here already. And in that context, constituents receive nothing in exchange for their votes for a legislative member. We know that we receive nothing because we also know that we have the least effective legislature in the country. Fewer bills produced in our 2-year fully salaried legislative session than in legislatures that work part-time. Not for 2 years. It really is an extraordinary contrast. We heard the fact that ours is the only legislature with this kind of stipend system in the entire country. And that position of being an absolute outlier is true across a number of different dimensions. The dimension I just mentioned around effectiveness, and also the dimension of competitiveness. We also have the fewest competitive elections of any state in the country. Over the last roughly decade, about 50% of our elections have had only one candidate in the entire election. These are pieces of a puzzle that belong together. We can't have a functioning legislature if our legislators are dependent on the speaker because of the stipend system, as we've seen. We need to correct that, and we need the kind of accountability that can reinforce that through records of committee votes and the like, through public records acts requirements on our legislature. At the same time, that also needs to be enforced outside of the State House through competitiveness in elections. Hence, I'm here again from the ballot committee because we are very supportive of your measures to improve the procedures and actions inside the legislative chamber. We think that that also needs to be reinforced with competitive elections outside the chamber. Hand in glove, these two pieces together are what can drive us forward towards a healthy democracy in Massachusetts. I want to say two more things about my own motivation in supporting both of these endeavors. The first is historical. I was in Concord yesterday. It's impossible to go to Concord and not remember the great history of this country and the particular ways and reasons we took on the concentrated power of King George III. Among other things, what did he do? He delivered stipends to half of Parliament, all right? And that was very clear to all the pro-democracy forces that the people had lost their voice because the king had claimed ownership over half of the legislature. The idea that we in 2025 are in the same place as people were in 1775 is mind-blowing. We simply need to rectify it, drawing on our traditions of grassroots democracy, as Scotia said. My second motivation comes from the work that I do with kids. I spend a lot of time doing civic education work with grade 8 civic education curricula, for example. I was just at the City of Cambridge's Civic Showcase for their 8th graders. And as I've been doing that work for decades, at a certain point doing that work here in Massachusetts, I came to realize I could not stand up in front of a group of students, a classroom of 8th graders, and say, vote. I couldn't say, prepare to take an active role, because I knew if I were doing that, I was inviting them into a process that would provide no reward, no responsiveness. Their votes would be meaningless. And in that context, I found that I had no option. If I was going to continue educating kids to step up into their civic responsibility, I, as an adult, needed to take responsibility for ensuring that they would have a legislature that works for them. So that's why I am here. So not just for myself, not just for all of us, but for rising generations, because how on earth can we ask them to participate, stand up, and take their role and responsibilities if we have a legislature that is the least competitive in the country, the least transparent in the country, the least effective in the country, and the most dependent on the purse of a single individual analogous to George III.
Wow.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Carnevale. I serve as chair of the Massachusetts Republican Party. And I'll just mention previously, I spent 10 years working in DC on Capitol Hill as a legislative staffer or a member of Congress. So really familiar with some of the issues we're talking about here today. I may weave in a little bit of that in my comments. But first, let me just thank the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature for organizing this event and the work that went into developing the legislature. So I'll try not to get too partisan with my remarks, but it's clear that the supermajorities that we have on Beacon Hill have resulted in this sense of lack of accountability to the people. In a state like Massachusetts, where democracy was really founded in the birth, it's tragic to see that we've reached a point where 72% of the people can pass a measure demanding accountability of our legislature, and our legislative leaders are just completely ignoring it and without consequence. I'll steal a phrase from our former governor, Charlie Baker. He used to talk a lot about, and still does talk a lot about the importance of having two teams on the field. And that's important because having two teams on the field leads to public dialogue, it leads to debate, it leads to more transparency and accountability and better public policy results. And not having the two teams on the field here in Massachusetts has led to a leadership of one party that is showing their lack of accountability. And so kudos to the coalition for developing these two measures. And it's clear that we need fundamental reform, process reform in Massachusetts to achieve better public policy. And so with these two measures, one, addressing the stipend issue, we talked about, King George, really interesting comparison. Legislators do react to kind of that reward system, and it is clear that the stipend system really benefits very few here in Massachusetts, and it's the legislative leaders. It doesn't benefit good public policy, it doesn't benefit results, and so there has to be reform. And the fact that our legislature is not even holding a hearing on this issue speaks volumes about what they think of all of us as constituents and taxpayers. And the other issue of the legislative service, it's just hard to imagine that Massachusetts, as one of the states with allegedly a full-time legislature, does not have this service. When I worked on Capitol Hill, all the time, we were contacting, either the Congressional Research Service for opinions on legislation and helping us understand what the real-time effect of bills as they came to the House floor. what that would be, or legislative counsel to help us draft bills. We would have to go through legislative counsel before a member of Congress could even introduce a bill to ensure that it's consistent with the law. And so for a state like Massachusetts not to even offer that service, really does a disservice to good public policy, to our law, to our legislation, and to our process. So again, happy to be here on behalf of the Republican Party and lend our voice with these other groups to this really important effort to achieve fundamental reform to bring back democracy to Massachusetts and allow more transparency, more accountability, and a more open process on Beacon Hill for all of us as taxpayers. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jay. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I'm Michael Widmer. I am the former longtime president of the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, some 25 years. I retired about 10 years ago. I'm here to focus on the issue briefly of legislative stipends. In 2014, the legislature passed and the governor signed a bill to create it's called a Special Advisory Commission regarding the compensation of public officials. There were seven members on that commission, Kathy Minahan and others. It was a very first-class commission that looked mainly at the salaries of constitutional officers and legislative leaders. We made a number of recommendations about increasing salaries for those individuals. At that moment in time, stipends were such a small fraction of total compensation that we paid very little heed to it. Looking back at the numbers, the total additional salaries for people under the stipend system was about 8% of the total compensation. So it was small. I subsequently testified before the legislature in support of our recommendations around increasing the basic salaries of the governor, lieutenant governor, and so forth, the House Speaker and Senate President. In 2017, the legislature acted on the recommendations. They made their own decisions on the increase in salaries for the leaders. Well, what they did, and this was the turning point in terms of the stipend issue, what they did is they totally increased and expanded the use of stipends in the 2017 legislation. So if you just look at the Democrats, among the Democrats in the House in 2015, fewer than half had stipends. But in the 2017 legislation, a 50% increase in the number of stipends for Democrats, and a tripling in the compensation, total compensation of the stipends, so that you had 87 of the 125 Democrats in the House receiving some kind of stipend, and instead of 8% of total, it was 20%. Since then, the number has increased just marginally because there are only so many Democrats in the House. But today it's 95. But the dollars have increased another 40%. So if it was roughly 600,000 in 2015, a decade later, it's 2.5 million. And it's about 23% of total compensation. I'll give a few examples. The size of the existing stipends are increased dramatically in addition to expanding the number. Speaker went from 35,000 to 80,000. House Ways and Means Chair from 25 to 65. My Majority Leader 22.5 to 60. Speaker Pro Tem 15 to 50, and so forth. The stipends had before 2015, except for the 6 leaders, been 15,000 and 7,500, so they've been marginal. But with these changes in 2015, 15,000 became 30 and 7,500 15,000. You've heard articulate descriptions of the concerns around stipends, which I absolutely share. Obviously, it's terrible compensation policy in and of itself, but it's not tied in any way to performance. In fact, there seems to be some inverse correlation there. Thank you for laughing. I like that line. But it is true, sadly. And then, as several people have said, it's clearly a means of control by legislative leaders over the rank and file. Final comment, I'm probably the oldest person in this room. I spent a career either working in state government or with state government and politics, public policy, for really close to 50 years. And that puts me back into the early Middle Ages, the 1970s. And I was director of communications for Michael Dukakis in his first term in the 70s. And it was a vital legislative body. And that has been my North Star in terms of thinking about where we are today and where we need to be. But two names that collaborated, not on the same page, but although they were in several important issues. Three names: Barney Frank, Michael Dukakis, and Paul Cellucci. And it was a vital legislative body that did a lot of very good legislation, nonpartisan, great cooperation. And so that's, as I say, my North Star, and what I'd like to see even some semi-return to such a body. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Next, Barbara Anthony, Mark Martinez, and Marianne Stewart.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Anthony. I'm new to this group. I'm filling in today for one of your wonderful members, Mary Connaughton from Pioneer. Mary could not be here today, and I'm affiliated with Pioneer as a healthcare policy consultant. This is not an area that I have done a lot in, although I've done a lot of work in transparency just in terms of healthcare. But this has just been an amazing experience for me, coming in from, sort of coming down on this and just listening to everyone. And I'm old enough to go back to the Dukakis days, as Michael was talking about it, and forward. And it has been so, personally for myself, it's been very, very frustrating as a healthcare policy person, trying to join others to see various pieces of legislation enacted that would bring healthcare costs down in Massachusetts. And I'm not talking about Medicaid here. I'm talking about healthcare costs that rose the last time the Health Policy Commission clocked it was 9%. We have a benchmark that the Health Policy Commission set at 3.5, so we're tripling that. Right now, each year there's legislation introduced by proponents of trying to reduce restructuring and reducing healthcare costs for all people in Massachusetts that doesn't really seem to go anywhere. I know that's shocking to hear, but it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And sitting here today and listening to the speakers who have been talking about the reform bills that you've gotten in there, you have put forward, it's just it's so illuminating to me. And I kind of knew it, because I know the players. I know who used to be a committee chair, who's now heading up a major lobbying group on the other side of reducing healthcare costs. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. But I didn't really understand the stipend system. And I'm telling you, I'm blown away listening to it. It just coming in from the outside, it's crazy. Sometimes I think here in Massachusetts, we get used to things being a certain way, and we think, oh, okay, you know, we're really doing okay, things are going along, but the rest of the world, I'm coming in from the top down, and I'm telling you, right, this stipend stuff is totally off the ball. I mean, I don't know. I remember, you know, and I know in our legislature, I mean, obviously, we're not naive. There are powerhouses, centers of power, the Speaker, the Senate President, and their lieutenants, and so on. But I do remember many years ago, a certain state legislator who voted against the Speaker at the time, and when the Speaker then became Speaker again, that legislator, the next time I saw her, had her belongings taken out of her office, put in a grocery cart and wheeled down to the basement to her new office next to the bathroom. I mean, that wasn't a stipend. That actually preceded this 2015 stipend change. But that's the kind of power that there is. So we're not naive. We understand that's the way things work. But the two bills that John and Jean spoke about earlier they're so essential to a well-functioning democracy. I mean, again, it is the bill dealing with stipends is just in need of, it's crying for reform. I mean, it's just obscene, the amount of money. And as Richard and Mr. Whitmer said, it's, you know, you get paid for not doing. You actually, there's an inverse relationship. The less you do, the more you get. That doesn't sound right. It's not right. And with respect to the Independent Research and Analytical Bureau, it's akin to the Congressional Budget Office. I mean, I do a lot of healthcare research. Where do I go to find out what is really going on? I go to the Congressional Budget Office website. I read their reports. You know, and I'm saying that they're always right and that they're not subject to, you know, failings. But by and large, they're pretty solid. And I can't imagine, just as a researcher and someone who performs analysis, not having that kind of independent source. But it's just startling to me, and it was mentioned earlier that Massachusetts is what, the only state that doesn't, it's really crazy. I mean, that is just, and we used to have it for good reason, all right? So that and the stipend system, I mean, those two bills are inextricably bound in terms of any type of reform that we're going to have here. So I'm just here to say that I'm so glad that Mary asked me to come today. It's been a terrific, it's a great bipartisan group. There aren't many of these around, as you know, but it's good to be here and to be with you. And I'm going to be reporting back to Mary, and I hope that I can stay a bit involved as well, because this is so needed here in the state. So much to do. So congratulations to all of you on the committee and for all the great things that you're doing.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Mary Ann Stewart. I'm a member of the leadership team of Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts. I live in Lexington. I'm also one of the citizen petitioners appearing on both of the reform bills submitted to the legislature this session. It's clear that the Massachusetts State House doesn't want you to see or hear this, so we're here to make sure that they do. I've spent many years advocating, among other things, for transparency, justice, and the kind of leadership that prioritizes people over power. That's why I stand with the coalition to reform our legislature, CROL, in demanding what should be the bare minimum in a functioning democracy, and that's fairness. Here's the reality. As you've been hearing, the two reform bills were filed in accordance with House and Senate rules designed to make the Massachusetts legislature more accountable, more effective, more transparent. They would empower legislators with independent research and fiscal analysis, ensuring that decisions are based on objective data and not on the deep pockets of special interests. They would restore integrity to the stipend system, eliminating the mechanisms that reward loyalty over merit. These are bills that would improve outcomes not only for the dysfunction in the Massachusetts legislature, but ultimately for we, the people. Yet despite following all proper channels, State House leadership has refused to grant these bills a public hearing. They don't want the people to know about them. They don't want public debate. They don't want scrutiny. But here's the thing about people who believe in fairness. We don't back down. We, the politically diverse fighting for these reforms, are holding our own hearings because we will not allow silence to be their weapon against us. We won't let them dismiss legislation that can make the system work because the legislature belongs to the people. And when the people speak, those in power need to listen. So we're here to raise our voices louder than their obstruction, to stand with CROL and demand accountability. And if the State House leaders won't allow public hearings, we create our own, and we won't stop until they hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Mary Ann. Mark is not here. Mark had wonderful things to say. You can imagine what they were. Two people who couldn't be here have offered some written testimony, so I'm going to read a letter from Barney Frank, and then we have a letter from Vic Mohammed. Sorry? It's not working?
You gotta put it,
use it. I'm married to an IT department, and she's not here, so what can I say? So this is addressed to me from Barney Frank. Dear Jay, as a lifelong legislator, 8 years in the General Court, 32 in Congress, I was very pleased to learn about the efforts you and your allies are making to enhance the ability of the members of the Massachusetts House and Senate to fulfill the role assigned to them in our democracy, applying their independent, informed judgment in the best interest of their constituents. First, in the absence of an independent, well-financed research unit that is charged with responding to requests from any member, legislators are often forced to rely for information on entities with their own agendas, the executive branch, private enterprise, advocacy groups, etc. One need not disapprove of the motives of those offering this legitimately self-advancing advice to favor an unbiased, totally disinterested source of advice to lawmakers' inboxes. Second, my conviction that society is ill-served when people of the caliber we should want to be making our laws can earn so much more in the private sector than in public office has not been weakened by my personal transition from the latter to the former. But I do not think that giving legislature leadership unfettered discretion to pay some members more than others is the right way to fix this. In fact, the lower the amount of base pay, the more additional leverage they gain from their ability to raise compensation closer to a livable wage. Leaders of houses, assemblies, and senates already have strong tools for persuading their members to follow their lead, like assigning them to a room in the basement, including, in some cases, actual persuasion. Not around here so much, but there is a qualitative difference between applying political pressure on other politicians, one issue at a time, in an ongoing bargaining process, and buying their allegiance with a one-time monetary gift of an entire term, especially when that gift is tied to easily retracted strain. This does not mean I think speakers and majority leaders should have no power to assemble majorities on tough issues, or that recalcitrant members are always right when they differ with them. What it does mean is that adding power over the level of legislators' income as a check on their freedom to represent their constituents as they see fit violates a basic premise of democracy. So, thank you, Barney. And now, Vic, oh, there we go. Thanks. Do you want to just use this?
Consent. Thank you so much, Chair Kaufman, for the opportunity to testify today at this people's hearing. My name is Evan Mackay. I'm a grassroots organizer, and I'm on the executive committee of the Massachusetts Sierra Club, and I'm reading words from our executive director, Vic Mohammed. So the Massachusetts Sierra Club is one of the biggest and oldest grassroots environmental nonprofits in the state and country. We have over 20,000 members and 80,000 supporters and followers throughout the Commonwealth, and we lead on advocacy efforts regarding clean energy, fossil fuels, conservation, toxic chemicals, transportation, and other policies regarding climate justice and public health. I'm here today because our volunteers, our members, our donors, our communities are fed up with the state of Massachusetts. Our state legislature is one of the least productive in the nation, and session after session, passionate activists see policies beget majority co-sponsorships, yet no floor votes. And many times, issues that most Massachusetts residents support languish in these obfuscated committees in these arcane procedures. Every day, we hear from members frustration at our elected officials who seemingly have no accountability to pass laws that people in Massachusetts support. Oftentimes, these frustrated members will suggest that we must push issues to a ballot initiative as the only way to get our voice heard. We should not have to bring issues directly to the ballot just because our elected officials won't do their job in passing laws that their constituents support. Yet, unfortunately, we see time and time again that various advocacy efforts must go to the ballot because of either a lack of willingness or a lack of competence from our state legislators in carrying forth the duties that they are charged with. The Sierra Club supports the coalition to reform our legislature. We support S 2614 and H 3892 to establish offices of legislative research and fiscal analysis. We support S 1301 and H 4303 to strengthen representation and promote democratic, transparent, and efficient lawmaking. We appreciate the opportunity to be heard here today, which stands in stark contrast to our ability to have constituent voices and inclusive public processes that we are lacking on Beacon Hill. Thank you all so much.
Evan, if I can have that back at some point for our record. A number of other people have signed up to testify, so I'm not sure whether you still want to do that, but Ian Warren? Okay. Barbara said Alex Smullen? Yes, Alex.
Hi. I will make a very short comment. First of all, I'd like to thank the Progressive Dems, the CROL, all of the speakers. I think that you've been extremely articulate about talking about these bills, why they're necessary, and all the frustrations we're experiencing. But I'd like to put it in a slightly larger context, which is we have a problem in this country. We cannot get things done. It is not a partisan problem. It is not a problem of any specific administration. We have become really incapable of acting. And one of the things that really frustrating about our situation in Massachusetts is that we're not an extreme state. We're a state where there is a fair amount of agreement about many, many things that we should be doing effectively. And where, as has been pointed out, huge percentages of the population agree, majorities of our representatives agree and sponsor, and we can't get it done. We should be a leader in this nation of how a civilized state where we can have dialogue and get things done can work. And it is even more frustrating in that context to me.
Alex's comment prompts one for me, which I hadn't anticipated, and I'm sort of abusing my role as moderator by speaking, but I wanted to make sure you are clear, as we are, that the measures that we are putting forward are not the ultimate fix, right? They are important steps in the right direction, and more importantly, they are ways to frame a public conversation. But until we get a public that is informed and engaged and involved in these issues and in the bigger ones that Alex is referring to, we unfortunately are seeing our democracy work about as well as King George would have wanted it to work. So we know that we know that these measures are important in and of themselves, but they are part of a much larger agenda that we're going to need to stick to for years, if not decades. Kathleen, do you have a question that you want to ask? I'll bring you the microphone, why don't I?
Thank you. I am Kathleen Cavell. I'm a leader also of Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts and indeed a founder. And what Alex has just said was why we started Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts 22 years ago. I have a stake in the upskirting statute because when I was working as a lawyer for the state, I was involved in prosecuting a teacher who used a camera to peer underneath the skirts of his fourth graders. And I would like to ask a question of Jean Kempthorne, who I know can answer it, about what went wrong with the upskirting statute that we passed some years ago because there was no legislative research work product for the state legislature to use, for the House and the Senate to use in passing that statute. Could you just mention upskirting for us?
I'm happy to say.
Go to the front so that they can see.
The third time, I hope, is the charm. The bill is being heard as we speak before the Judiciary Committee. We've got no anything. But the story of that bill, very quickly, and that hue and cry in the public because of an incident. Public is outraged. Why hasn't the legislature fixed the peeping Tom statute so that it's relevant in the electronic age? So in 2 days, they pass a bill. And the bill is a mess. It's a mess. And it's a mess it's apparent that it's a mess almost immediately. Because it's not a rare crime. Right away there's a charge, and the charge goes awry with a judge saying, I can't make sense of this. I don't know how to tell the jury what the elements are. And anyway, it goes all the way up to the SJC. Do you think the legislature, which was so worried about passing this bill because it was on the front page and they were caught, with their pants down, essentially, that they would be in a rush to fix it? They were not. Here we are, 10 years later, and there are many cases all falling apart because the statute is so poorly drafted. So anyway, I have, in 3 successive sessions, tried to fix the bill, and now I have a brand new legislator, and this is what happens. Brand new legislator, and she's gung-ho and thinks she can do this, and I hope she's right. I hope she's right, because it's been really a tragic trajectory to date.
Thank you.
So I had meant to do this earlier. If there are any press questions, I would welcome them at this point. So, sure. Thank you for being here, first of all.
Sure. I'm with State House News Service. Hi. I've got one for you, actually, Mr. Chairman. You were in leadership.
I'm Jay now.
You were in leadership. Can you talk about some of your experiences of what that was like and how that's informed your work here? And do you think that this issue has gotten worse since you left the legislature in 2018?
So I don't want this hearing to be about me, but I will answer that question because I think it's instructive. Yes, it has gotten worse. If for no other reason than it has gone on longer. There have been at least 2 decades, maybe 3, of decreasing democracy in the institution across the street. And that's a tragedy. So the answer to your second question is yes, it has gotten worse. The answer to your first question it was pretty damn bad before it got worse. And I'll give you as brief an answer to your question as I can without doing it injustice. I had requested the chairmanship of the Committee on Revenue in order to do major tax reform because I found our tax system fundamentally broken, both in its fairness and its capacity to raise the money that we needed. Obviously, there's some political disagreements about that, but that was something I felt passionately about. And somehow or other, the speaker at the time appointed me to the chairmanship of that committee, despite the fact that he didn't see things the way I did and wasn't really aligned in any way. In order to maintain the chairmanship and advance what became the Fair Share Amendment to the Constitution, I needed to silence myself a lot and pick and choose my battles to not wind up too far off course from the speaker and his team. And his team included members who both personally and politically absolutely hated me, and were not at all happy with the fact that I don't score very high on the go along to get along scale. So there were people around the speaker gunning for me the entire time. And the price I had to pay, or the price I willingly paid, I suppose I should say, to stay in a position to advance something that I thought was an important political and philosophical goal, that price led to feeling incredibly disheartened, disempowered, and dishonest, quite frankly. And that is not a position that a legislature should be put into.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Mr. Moderator, a hearing is supposed to be both sides of an issue. I understand the legislature, both Senate and House, was advised of this hearing. I'm wondering if you would ask any representative from the House and Senate who's here if they want to come forward and speak contrary to what's been proposed.
I apologize for not making that invitation. Yes, please. They're all so busy. There are a bunch of hearings across the street. Right? They're very busy. But other questions or comments?
Jordan Brooke Powers, former executive director of Mass Alliance, and one of the founding people on CROL. And so I just want to talk about the experience from what I saw from the legislators. So one of my roles with Mass Alliance and through our PAC was we would work directly with people who are running for office. And the great thing about people when they start running for office is they have big ideas. They really, we're not sending people to the legislature. You don't go through that process unless and most people, I guess I should say, don't go through that process unless you have big ideas of what you want to do for the state. And they get to the State House, and what's immediately what happens? Somebody gets assigned to them to tell them to stop dreaming, to stop thinking that you can do things, to stop actually trying to be effective. And so you have this thing where all of these amazing people get sent to the legislature, and then they're immediately told, don't do any of those things. Right? Don't think, whatever bill you want, whatever thing you promised people you would do when you got elected, you're not gonna do any of those things. What you're gonna do is what the speaker says you're gonna do. Right? So immediately they start to tamp down your beliefs. And you may think, no, I'm gonna fight on, I'm gonna try and go on. But then what happens? Your colleagues say, you can't speak up. What happens if you speak up? You're not effective, you can't do. What does effective mean? It means not doing things. Effectiveness is, again, an inverse to actually the things you promised and planned to want to do. So then you start to think, okay, well, I'm not gonna pass anything to make healthcare more affordable. Or at least maybe at the edges, but nothing major, none of the big ideas I have. I remember there was a legislator who had an expertise, and the speaker said, well, I can't send you that committee because you have expertise. So he sent the committee to something he knew nothing about. You know what he had the audacity to do? Learn about it. And then he proposed a bill to fix the thing that he was on this committee. And you know what the speaker did? He said, I can't give you any more policy places because you tried to pass a policy. So then he got put on a third reading because it was like, how dare you try to legislate? And so when you have this autocratic system, when you have a system where autocracy is rewarded and competency is downgraded, where loyalty is more important, right? You have a system which actually is bad for us because it's incompetent. Incompetence, and you're actually tamping down the expertise of 160 really smart people who have the problem with the legislature not functioning as a legislature is you're missing all of their brilliance, all of their big ideas, all of the things that they want to do to make the world better get squashed down. And what do they end up doing? They'll tell you, I got $25,000 for that park. I got $50,000. I have one idea that's going to affect 100,000 people. That's not no one, but it's not 7 million people, which is what they dream of when they're going there. So their dreams start to be narrower. Their impact that they are proud of has to become tiny. and they become proud of the fiefdoms that they control among their cities because we also have an entirely undemocratic system for our localities. So now they don't have any power in the legislature, but they can make sure that your town doesn't get money if they're mad at your mayor, and then they control, and then maybe they're excited about that fiefdom. But it is a bad way, and it's harming us as regular people in the world, but it's also a really bad thing for our legislators, which is why so many of them are moving out, why so many of them can't wait to get to someplace else, why they run for other things so quickly, because they are being tamped down. Their brilliance is being tamped down. And I think that's often what gets lost in this system, where you have 3 or 4 people control absolutely everything. They just don't have the expertise, they don't have the range, they don't have the lived experience to legislate for 7 million people. That's why we have an elected representation. So I'm really happy that we're here to talk about this. It's really sad to have seen people who I have saw. It's like watching their light die quickly, right? People who you knock doors with in their communities, who tell voters these big ideas of the changes they want to make, and then go to the legislature and have all of that die.
So Jordan, you touched on something that, of the many things that have me disappointed and sad, what you just referenced is high on the list. I just saw so many colleagues die before my eyes. I saw the light go out of their eyes. And they're across the street now dead. And I don't know that what we have proposed is a sufficient wake-up call to wake them up. I'm not representing CROL in this next comment, but I has me doubts. I think it's a good way to raise some questions, but I think ultimately the fix is ours to make, and it's political. If they won't be responsive, then we have to find other people who are going to run. So the hard work of reform is still, at the end of the day, political, and it's not partisan. That's why I'm really excited about the fact that CROL is intentionally and deliberately bipartisan, because this is a bipartisan problem. The Republicans are as asleep as the Democrats in the House and Senate right now. So if this were a real hearing across the street, you would expect in a well-functioning legislature that the follow-up would be some discussion of the issues, maybe some research, then a public meeting at which the members of the committee would actually be in attendance and engage on the issues, file amendments, modify a bill, ultimately take a public vote on the bill, and advance it in one way or another for further consideration. That is not what we're doing here today. Obviously, this is more an advocacy effort, but it's also not what goes on across the street. You would expect deafening silence after a hearing like this across the street, and you would not be disappointed in your expectations. So we have a lot of work to do, an awful lot of work to do. Among other things, we are, unless there are other people who still want to speak, come on up. One of my favorite activists who will not back down.
So my name's Todd Berger, Lexington resident. I've been very active politically in the town. I'm on the town meeting, but I also was the policy director for Bob Massey when he ran for governor. And I didn't expect to be at a meeting today here applauding so many Republicans who came up to speak, but I applaud every single one of them and everyone else who was on the panel, and you, Jay. I have one question that I'll ask at the end for you. Just a comment. I hope within the next year that I'm part of a group making an announcement that fills in one more piece of the puzzle that I think exists. I spent most of my career solving complex puzzles, and I think the one we're here talking about, the lack of transparency, the lack of competence and effectiveness in the legislature, I think there is this one more piece. Jay, you alluded to it, there's a political element. And I think I've been talking with a number of you and others not in this room about what that solution is. I'm not going to announce that today. It's for a larger group to announce. But I hope within the next 6 to 12 months you all hear that. Jay, my one question is, will a recording of this session be available that we can put a link up on our Facebook or other media pages?
Thankfully, yes, there will be such a link.
That's great. It'll be up online. Thank you.
And we hopefully have all your email addresses. If you did not leave one on the way in, please do on the way out, so we can let you know not only about that link, but when we're next going to try to gather to figure out what our next steps are.
That's great. Thank you, Jay.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Elaine Almquist. I'm an active citizen and a political consultant, and I live in Somerville. I have a comment and a question. My comment is, in 2003, I interned in the State House for the State Senate, and I had the very unusual experience for today's interns of going down to the Senate floor and the House floor and actually watching debate. I nowadays speak to college Democrats and college students and young people, and when I mention this, and they are also interns, they are floored that this is something that used to happen and does not happen anymore. I think that's atrocious as a trend for our democracy in Massachusetts. My question is, given the history of the Commonwealth and our nation and what we know about our communities, we have deep inequities across the various districts that we have. And so my question is, and hopefully we can get this answered maybe later on, I would love to know the relationship between the discrepancies in the stipend and who actually gets which money. So do our women legislators, do our people of color legislators get compensated less than our white and male colleagues in the legislature? And also, do the people representing districts that are largely communities of color or poorer districts make less money for representing those districts? I would love to see the math on that. Thank you.
That's actually an excellent suggestion. I don't think we have that breakdown, but we should be able to answer that question with a little bit of analysis. And it is an important question because people of color and women are still underrepresented across the street.
Particularly in leadership.
And certainly in leadership, but even in the body as a whole. I also was reminded of something else you said by way of your experience across the street. When I'm asked now how citizens can get a sense of the legislature in action, I remind them that inaction is one word. Because that is what they are likely to see, to your point about what interns and even staff are seeing now. But to the points that were made earlier, there's some intentionality there. That's not an accident. When you have a system this dysfunctional for this long, it's working for somebody. So our job is to make sure it's working for us.
Thank you, Jay. I just have a question that I thought about it earlier, but what you just said now triggered it again. The lobbying laws in Massachusetts. So it has CROL, and I know we're limited by resources, but is that something that's being, in other words, you can leave being chairman of the House Healthcare Committee one day, and then the next day you're president of a major association and lobbying, on behalf of God and everybody else. And so my question, I should know that as I've been in and out of state government and the federal government, but nobody ever wanted me to pay me to do any lobbying anyway, so I didn't have to worry about it. But what are the lobbying? Is that something that we should look at, to prohibit for longer periods of time people who leave the legislature and then go into the private sector from coming back and lobbying their own buddies across the street?
Revolving door.
Yeah. I mean, it's old as
Good idea. I don't have any expertise in that area, but I'm happy to keep it on the list of questions that we should be addressing. Clearly very important. I can report with complete certainty and complete honesty that none of us are getting paid for the work that we're doing. Lest there be any doubt about that.
Unlike all the demonstrators on Saturday, right?
I don't need the microphone, I just want to know, so are there next steps? Or is that what
yes,
your next meeting?
There are next steps. I can't stand here and tell you what they are, because we're meeting tomorrow on our usual Zoom platform to begin to, first of all, appreciate what we were witness to here today, but then secondly, figure out, okay, what are the holes that were identified, and what are the next steps that we might take to advance what we already know to be an important agenda. We have very specifically, one of the questions that we are considering is whether to take one or both of these issues to the ballot. There's some significant consequences to doing that, but we're actively weighing it. Again, not with the expectation that we'll get the same 72% that the auditor got last year, and the same reading across the street. But if we decide to do that, it's in part to change laws where we can, and in part to advance the public conversation that needs advancing. So, a very non-specific answer to your question.
We'll be watching.
With that,
we have your email addresses.
Yes.
With that, we are doing something here today that almost no legislative committee has ever done. We began on time and we're ending on time.